As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Harry, and good morning, Pete Khalil Saucier. He's with us, chair of the, and associate professor and chair of the Africana Studies at Bucknell University. I was chatting with Khalil right before we went live that I graduated from Bucknell with a bachelor's in political science in 1971, and Khalil was born 1 or 2 years after that. And I just say that, you know, I'm just a wisdom, Khalil. You can just, you have a person, a font of wisdom, but I share that sometimes as you get older, you realize, Professor Saucier, that you don't know things. It's really like a new discovery. Everything I think I've learned and think I've kind of shared with people, share with me, revisiting, rethinking, sometimes even unlearning is sometimes the real chance to learning again. And I say that in the sense of the article that I saw that you wrote in the Black Agenda Report. I should say that Johnny Eric Williams, chair of the sociology department at Trinity here in Hartford, posted the article, and I saw it. And again, the title was not necessarily provocative, although it is provocative, but insightful. I mean, and just what I fear about university actions in the context of Black Lives Matter, what I fear about university actions in the context of Black Lives Matter. And then I read it, and then I saw that your affiliation with Bucknell. By the way, Khalil, how long have you been there in Lewisburg?
I started here in 2006. I was actually brought in to build the Africana Studies program.
Okay, so you're part of the woodwork then.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the Moses of this overnight.
Exactly.
And you still have, well, I should say that you still have some hair, but that's maybe not true.
No, I mean, I don't have much hair at all. I haven't had it for years. So.
Okay, but you had some when you first came to Lewisburg, though.
No, I was bald then too.
Okay.
So, when you try to build Black Studies programs, you go bald quicker, I think.
Well, and that's what intrigued me about the article. We're going to really take the deep dive and slowly chat about the article, and I might kind of ask you to repeat and restate some things. But to know that in 2020, on the verge of 21, that we're discussing Black Studies, and the way that you kind of articulated in your article, again, the title, what I fear about university actions in the context of Black Lives Matter. It's just when I was at Bucknell, that was the heyday, 67 to 71, of starting Black Studies programs and the Association of Black Bucknellians and protests, et cetera. But every generation, it seems to me, has to kind of find its own destiny. And sometimes this current destiny is very, I got to tell you, Khalil, somewhat sobering and depressing. That I'm still chatting with you about this topic, quite frankly. Sure. Before you were born, we were trying to deal with this issue. But on the other hand, sometimes, as you referenced in your article, white supremacy, anti-Blackness is nothing that can easily go away in 20 or 30 or 40 years. So let's jump in. The title of the article, what I fear about university actions in the context of Black Lives Matter. Talk to me about that.
No, I mean,
and the circumstance, because you talked about there's a meeting this summer.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing I want to make clear, I mean, this, brief little essay that was posted on Black Agenda Report was really, I mean, the culmination of events since I got here. So, which is to say, events since 2016. And, I came to Bucknell actually because I thought there was a certain opportunity to build a kind of Black Studies in its original form. You mentioned, the heydays of the 60s and early 70s. And this was really the time where, Black Studies had some autonomy in the academy. It was not of the university. It was deeply and intimately connected to the community. So I thought, given that Bucknell did not have one, that coming here in 2016, we could kind of reinstitute an original formation, if you will. And over the years since I've been here, it's been a struggle because, people are more interested in, say, the cultural aspects of things rather than kind of building the political thrust of Black studies. And I would say that, this summer, a lot of my colleagues, faculty, and administrators began to really feel bad given the new and constant video footage that we were seeing. And with that, I started to really become a little more fearful about what's going to happen, because I continue to hear all this chatter from people in all departments about anti-racism. And I was fearing exactly what kind of education students were going to get, because these are well-intentioned people, I'll say that, but they're not necessarily trained in really understanding and comprehending the condition of truth there.
Well, just hit that pause button, because I think people need, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a meeting that you just assumed you would be involved. There was a strategic meeting that you thought you would just normally be involved in, and you were not. And when I read the article, I said, well, maybe that's just unique. When I read the first article, I thought maybe that's just unique to Bucknell. There's always campus politics. But then as I read it again and again, and as you referenced, this has happened to other people, you're saying for sure, and it's just not isolated to Bucknell. So just for people that are tuning in, something took place this summer. It was more than a microaggression. I guess you thought it was almost a macroaggression.
Well, it's just a part of a series of events, in the sense that anything, people were interested in what happened to George Floyd, and people wanted to do something. And instead of consulting, really the discipline and field that could really give, some more truth, some truthful answers. As chair, I was never asked to be part of anything. Rather, these issues move towards, diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I really think it was largely the result of, because the faculty in Africana here are really trained in a more critical perspective of Black studies, that we were kind of shut out. And instead of thinking of anti-Blackness,
say that differently. What some of the nuance of what you just said that there was and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that there was an intention to shut you out. Are you saying there was a deliberate desire to exclude you?
I think there is not always an explicit intention, but because Black political thought, Black studies is often pushed to the margins in the academy, it's not the first thing that comes to mind when one has to deal with, say, racism on campus or in the world. And that's largely because administrators think in certain ways. And I think colleagues think in certain ways too. So I don't want to say that it was an explicit and kind of there was a dastardly intention behind it, but it just continued to show me that Africana studies, again, probably the field that could give some better answers to what was going on and what's still going on, was really never consulted in a formal way. Rather, money was being thrown around, or at least being presented to teach race across the curriculum. And I worry about that because often when you talk about race and racism, Blackness and anti-Blackness serve as the stimuli, right? It provides the fodder to think about these problems in the world. But then once we get to solutions, or once we have to really kind of meditate about these things, Blackness gets pushed into the background again.
So are you saying that an official, we're in September, the verge on October, that in terms of students this year are was the policy implemented in terms of curriculum studies, in terms of racism being mandatory?
Nothing right now, no. And that was one of the things too, is that for a while I've advocated that Africana studies, Black studies courses be a requirement for Bucknell students.
Mm-hmm.
And this never got any traction. And it always fell on deaf ears. I thought the summer would be the time to mobilize that at least. But again, it was just this kind of capacious racism curriculum. So not formal, but apparently, there will be and is some development money to do this.
And are you, and since you published the article, and I'm assuming you've been in contact with the decision makers, are you now included in that process? The
No.
implementation process?
No.
Well, okay. I mean, I didn't want to ask that. That shows my innocence. And I'm so young. That's my
No. You think that that the program would be called to participate in more of this. It hasn't happened yet. You think that more resources would be given to us. That hasn't happened yet. I'm still waiting. Hopefully something will come at some point.
Okay. You write in your article that if we are to take this problem seriously and do it right, certain people, departments, and disciplines need to step aside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, again, this is where I think that Black Studies has, some of the answers, not to say all the answers, but it has, I think, better analytical frameworks for thinking about these problems that relate to Black people and Black communities worldwide. And I think Black Studies, the concepts that we use in it, better apprehend exactly, again, how the world is working and not for Black people and Black communities. So I don't think that, for instance, certain administrative positions have the understanding or the comprehension to make assessments and then also kind of decisions. And I think the same for a lot of disciplines. A lot of disciplines are really just kind of interested in thinking about racism writ large rather than really drilling down to the specificity of anti-Blackness.
Say if you can say more about that. And let me say again, I don't want to grill you, and I really appreciate the sensitivity of the topic, meaning that you've been kind of eating glass for a long time, and you still find a way to digest it. Mm-hmm. And I just want to give you the props right now. But you mentioned that white racism is real, but it is not anti-Blackness. Mm-hmm. For new, that's a kind of like a confusing phrase for folks.
Sure. I think a lot of times what happens is when we think of racism, we think of specific events. They tend to be more one-on-one interactions, like we see with police footage and things like that. If anything, they're larger group actions that are, again, pitted against one side or the other. And we tend to think that, these things are predicated and lubricated by simply bad ideas, bias, prejudice, which then result in discrimination. Well, I think if we look across, the world, we look across history, contemporary times, people do suffer on different scales based on bias and discrimination. But anti-Blackness really points to a kind of world making, a paradigm, a structure of how people think about the world that is so, I guess I could say commonsensical, it's not questioned. So I think a lot of people, like you mentioned political science earlier, a lot of people in political science will simply think about racism at the level of implicit bias, prejudice, and these
11:15.
So anti-Blackness is getting at this kind of world vision, this paradigm. And what I mean by that, because you want me to unpack it, I think the best way to understand a paradigm is the world round or flat, right? That's a paradigm. And I think anti-Blackness, a lot of us in this field think that anti-Blackness, or really feel strongly that anti-Blackness is the paradigm in which we live under. And it structures humanity. Who's a human, who's not a human, so forth and so on.
So just again, a little more, what's your vision? Are you saying that people need to have everyone has to have a Damascus Road experience, or have to shed their skin and go from a butterfly to a whatever the butterfly, or from a caterpillar to a butterfly?
Sure.
So it's just that the metaphor I can understand, but I'm trying to look for the transition in terms of how people actions and personality and process.
Sure. So if we just call it, if we're understanding these events that we see simply as bias, racial bias, and not as something that is deep-seated, right? Then our fixes are really going to be like what we have: diversity workshops, inclusion programs, so forth and so on. But none of those things eradicate that, subconscious, that unconscious of how the world thinks about Blackness. So if we're not identifying it correctly, then any action afterwards, whether it's policy, whether it's teaching in the classroom, anywhere, is going to be oriented to how we first conceptualized it. So if we see it as a larger problem, something that is structural, that structures humanity, then yeah, it requires that we essentially shed our skin, so to speak, right?
So in a sense, I hear you saying that if we, for example, people know about cancer, that there's various stages of cancer, stage 1, stage 2, stage. So if it's metastatic stage 4, and you just try to put a Band-Aid on it, I think you're saying that's not going to prevent the stage 4 from erupting.
Exactly.
What kind of antidotes, what kind of, and you and I are king of the world right now. We're going to declare and proclaim, we're going to wave our wand and change everything. What do you want? What's the antidote? Should we inject people with a serum? Should we go into their brain and do a different rearrangement?
Yeah, I wish it was as easy as a serum, right? But no, I think, and this is what I mean by I think certain people need to step aside in certain departments. I think first and foremost, what we need to do is we need to sit with the problem and really just, as one scholar, a scholar by the name of Jared Sexton says, sit with that anxiety, right, of anti-Blackness. People get very uncomfortable with it. And I think if we stay with it and we continue to critique the world and understand the world through that lens, then what we should do, whether it's a micro action or event or macro ones, is going to be predicated on, again, exactly how we understand this problem. So your analogy to cancer is correct here. If you want to root out cancer, you want to get to the root of the problem. You don't want to simply attend to the symptoms. And I think far too often what we do in the university, whether it's, throw development money at certain things, is that we are trying to correct the manifestations of anti-Blackness rather than the structure of it. So the things that manifest from it is what we concern ourselves with. And
normally, when I say normally, normally for my shows, I've been doing this for 5 years, and it's really been a pleasure to be involved. My guests, this is their chance to share their passion and their purpose and their vision. I very rarely interrogate or try to catch you questions. It's not putting you on the spot at all.
Sure.
But what you've just said has caused me to kind of double back. Only, I think, primarily because of my Bucknell experience. So I want to pose a question, and if you prefer not to answer it, that's fine.
Okay.
We've talked about the macro, but in terms of micro, you've alluded to that the door has kind of been slammed in your face thus far. What needs to happen for that door to open? Do students need to help you open the door? Do people need to riot? Do people need to protest? Do we need to write letters? Do we need to stop contributing to the alumni fund? I'm not being facetious, and I'm not taking on Lewisburg in isolation.
No, I mean, it's basically all the things that you mentioned. On the one hand, we need a bigger critical mass of students to take part in our curriculum. We're actually doing really well, given that we're so new. But students need to major. They need to take the classes. Classes are filling, but we need more. We need faculty to say, no, we're not going to do that. Let Africana Studies do that. To give up a little. We need alum to give money, because then that allows us to bring in, speakers and critical thinkers who we think are important without having to, always run it by, higher ups. So all that is absolutely necessary to create a more robust program. So the more voices in classrooms, outside classrooms, is absolutely necessary. I mean, you speak of alum, and funds coming in does help. There's actually a particular problem here at Bucknell. All departments have a tagline for the grants department here. Africana still doesn't have one. So if someone calls up and says, I want to give X amount of dollars to Africana, there's nowhere to place it. And
so is that just a process? I'm just confused a little bit.
again, what I think this shows, it is a process, but no one thinks about Africana. So, as there was this interview several years ago between two scholars, Sadia Hartman and Frank Wilderson, and the title of it in the title I had this word, unthought. Black studies, Africana studies is always unthought, right? And I think this happens across the board in the academy. So I've asked for taglines to be there for us, but apparently they're still not there. So.
Okay. I don't know what to say, man. You kind of let's jump to your book for a second and then I'll come with some more thoughts, because your book I was intrigued with, because I think that might help with having critical mass where the people go to, and I don't want to put words in your mouth again, but I think everyone's not going to go to Bucknell, everybody's not going to go to Harvard, everybody's not going to go to Yale, some people might even go to community colleges, but in terms of global education, your book, for example, Necessarily Black Cape Verdean Youth, Hip Hop Culture, and the Critique of Identity, I'm going to suggest anybody can read it, and I think and a lot of people can take advantage of it and find that education, particularly since when I graduated from Bucknell, the word hip hop was not even in the vernacular. I mean, just a few years afterwards. So, and there's a whole segment, I believe, of society, people between maybe 10 years old, given Beyonce, maybe 8 years old now and up, that it's a new world in terms of hip hop culture and glam and bling and I wouldn't mention some of the other videos that I've seen recently. But so you're addressing that. To me, it seems to me you're addressing that element of people that might could not find Lewisburg on the map. Am I in the right direction there somewhat?
In the book, Necessarily Black?
Right. And
yeah,
in terms of your public education persona.
Yeah, actually, I wrote the book in its manner and its size, for instance, to really go beyond the academy as well. Hip hop is in the title as a way in which to hook people, right. And it really doesn't spend a lot of time on hip hop, if I'm honest. But it's a way. It's a book that tries to think about, again, anti-Blackness structurally, rather than always focusing on identity. Because I think identity, while important at times, draws us away again, really, from the structure of anti-Blackness.
So say that differently, because people in my mind, we're at a Tower of Babel situation, literally, where there's so many voices, so much confusion, so much cacophony, and so much psychological depression. People aren't hearing or even spending time to hear. So we hear this word systemic racism, then we hear about individual actions, agency. So unpack what you've just said there a little bit more.
No, I mean, and none of all that is correct. All that exists: systemic, institutional racism, individual forms of racism. I don't think a lot of us think at a more meta level, or at least we don't think we think that way, even though we live this way all the time. And I actually think people outside the academy are more savvy to understanding this stuff than academics and students themselves, for the most part. Largely because of the lived reality. So I think this idea of anti-Blackness, although it's a kind of new conceptual lens, can be found in the work in the 60s and 70s, can be found in the work prior to, even the writings of, say, Du Bois or Ida B. Wells. Mm-hmm. It's just called different things, right? Like,
yeah.
When I think of Ida B. Wells in the late 1800s talking about, the unwritten laws of society, that unwritten law is the unwritten law of anti-Blackness, right? The impunity to do what one wants to Black people, right? That's anti-Blackness. I think when you look at, again, the works of the early 20th century, that stuff is there. It's just not named that. So
fast forward to Ibram Kendi and his popularity and his covering various, going beyond the ivory walls. Is it a fad, or is there something substantive in terms of what he's proposing?
Well, I think with his work, the anti-racism, Inc., as we could call it, really is, I think it's a fad. And I think when so much money, as there was a great piece on Black Agenda Report by Anthony Montero, showing right in the very beginning how much money has been, dumped into this type of work. That says something. What that says to me, and I think what says to the tradition that I try to work from, is it's not really going to change the status quo. Because it's not getting at the problems.
Okay. And so what can, if I was Bill Gates and Buffett, and Zuckerberg, and if I had as much money as all three of them, and I gave it to you, how would you use it?
Well, I mean, and if I had to develop an institute, I would, but I would bring certain types of people to this institute. I think it's interesting. I said in the article that got you interested in what I'm saying here, that Black Studies has been quarantined and sheltered and placed since the beginning.
Indeed.
And, that's the thing is when you had the Institute of the Black World in the 70s in Atlanta, which was outside the academy, and you had the establishment of all these really robust programs and centers and departments across the country, they were asking different questions. As soon as they started doing that, they were quarantined. Ford Foundation shut off money from them, and you saw actually a decline rather than a birth of these centers, programs, and departments. And so, yeah, if you had a bunch of money that you wanted to throw my way, I would do the same thing, but I would do it probably in the way that the Institute of the Black World did it, is bring in, not affiliated with a university, because with that comes certain types of, strings, and one that is really committed to the community, wherever it would be, and also to think globally and diasporically there.
And I appreciate you sharing that. When you reference Du Bois, I mean, as you know, he bounced around to a few institutions because of the same politics that you just identified. You mentioned the problem is the difference in the article. The problem is the difference between scale and kind. You kind of alluded to that, but I want you to kind of elaborate a little bit once again.
Yeah. So what a lot of people do is when you bring up anti-Blackness, they really think it's astounding how often it comes up that one is playing oppression Olympics, and this is the cultural wars of the late 80s, early 90s all over again. And really what I think people get mixed up is they get mixed up on the oppressive experience. I threw in the Holocaust, for instance.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that so many million people, suffered, right? Jews, Gypsies, etc. That's no one's denying that. So at the level of scale, numbers, the empirical, that which is observable, Native American people suffer.
Yes.
Right? We can go across the globe. No one's denying that. But there's something qualitatively different of the kind of suffering, right? And I pull this from Frantz Fanon and a whole bunch of other writers, that the kind of suffering is different because what the person is or what they become is different from what they were prior to the violence, if you will. So if we take the slave ship, for instance, and I'll just, because you're using the small essay, is that, you have the slave ships go to the coast of Africa and they take up all these people, these nations. But when they come out of the slave ship, as many scholars have shown us, they're no longer that, so to speak. They may still be practicing some of their cultural traditions, etc., which may carry on for decades and centuries, but they are no longer Ashanti. They're slave, right? No other group in modern history goes through that change. And that's something that we need to comprehend. That's Jews didn't go through that. Native American folk have not gone through that, right? One thing that a lot of people like to point out, like Native American people, as much as they've suffered, can always still demand their land back. They know where their land is. Black people can't demand land.
So it seems that you're referencing the psychological dimension of the common, people use the word trauma a lot now, and slave trauma. So I guess elaborate a little bit more, because we've gone through this psychic journey of assault. You're saying what?
That to remedy that, to fix that requires a whole different set of tools for understanding why things happen.
Okay.
Right.
Is your toolbox right behind you? Dig into your toolbox and tell me.
Yeah, some of them are.
So share some of, because again, we want people to kind of be excited, not necessarily depressed, but also
of course,
a catalyst to how they can work on their own toolbox.
This is the thing, is I get this often from students, is that the work I do in classrooms, the people we read are so, I'll hear the words nihilism, we're pessimistic.
Yes.
And, I always have to confront that, because I actually think, and this is not a new insight and it's not my own, but I think pessimists are actually the most hopeful people around, because when we read the pessimism of Franz Fanon or a George Jackson or a Sada Shakur or something like that, what we're reading is the limits of this world. And so the pessimists are most hopeful that a new world can be created, whatever that may look like, right?
All right.
Rather than staying within this world and trying to reform it over and over, right?
And we hear this word dystopia, which people never even knew. If you asked 5 years ago, how do you spell dystopia? Nobody, and now you hear it all the time. So you'll have these words that emerge in terms of our consciousness. I got to come back to my perhaps trick question, that in terms of your locus of control, your agency of control, you're there in Lewisburg, and I hear you say that some doors are still slammed on you. I also hear you saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, that it would be helpful to open those doors. So
yeah, it would be helpful to open those doors, but I also end that brief essay with saying, maybe this is how it's supposed to be, right? And that we'll continue to do what we do in Black Studies every time we enter the classroom, and that is offer an analysis, but also offer possibly a way out of this dystopia, right? Because what we try to do in these classrooms, those of us in critical Black Studies, is really the word you used earlier in the very beginning, unlearn. To unlearn what we know and how we act, right? To learn how to kind of think again and think on our own.
Could you teach, should more, I'm always, and I hold that, I don't mean to interrupt, but hold that thought. If you taught at a strictly, exclusively white institution, should we go after where the bodies are rather than where the mass bodies should white students, do you think you could convert? Would you be more effective teaching as many white students as you are effective teaching students of color?
I laugh at that, because actually, so prior to me coming to Bucknell, I reconstituted the Black Studies department at Rhode Island College, which was a state school. It's the oldest one in New England, actually. And so there, I really had a robust program of students from every walk of life, from color to age, all types of things. And there was, I still think about those days. I actually wish for them. So I think if we're going to create a different world, every student needs to have the option to unlearn and to think differently. Now, I think a premium needs to be placed for certain students. I think these Black Studies spaces are a place where I think Black students in particular should feel comfortable being enraged about the world. I think that can be productive, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be a domain exclusive to Black students, because what are we going to do with all the non-Black students who still think the world in the same messed up way?
Indeed. 40, 50, 60 million people will vote for the 145th imposter in November. Millions of people will still vote. Will vote in that way.
Yeah, and I think this is where it becomes important to unhinge things, thinking like this from identity, right? Because that is often a tripwire for a lot of people. Well, I'm not going to go take those classes because I'm not Black, or I'm not going to take those classes because I am Black.
So say some more about that, because your work deals with identity and gets in this conversation now, transformation and maturation and education. So say you've obviously you've been teaching for several decades.
Well, better part of a decade. I'm going on 15 years of teaching.
Going on 15 years.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that identity and transformation and learning and maturing and just evolving, I hear those words coming through. Yeah. The words that you've used.
I think study needs to be constant and infinite, It needs to be, I think I even used in the small essay, an infinite rehearsal.
Indeed.
Over and over. Identity I'm really interested in because I do find it as a kind of tripwire for thinking about these things, that some people can't say things because they don't identify as such. And it's really not identifying with a certain politics. And I think that's where the premium needs to be placed. That,
so say that differently. Say that differently.
So rather than really get kind of tripped up in identity politics, one should really adhere to politics of identification. So,
okay, so where does the Black Lives Matter movement fit into what you've just said?
Well, I think it's both, but I think it depends on who is thinking about Black Lives Matter.
Indeed.
You know, I think at certain moments you look at Black Lives Matter movements and events and people connected, and it's really just about identity. On the other hand, I think sometimes there are examples that it exceeds identity, and it's about destroying the paradigm, if you will.
And I really appreciate your allowing me to kind of lob these questions at you. They hadn't come to me until we kind of had this interaction. You referenced unlearning, but I think that implies at the same time there's some concentrated and systematic, I wouldn't say propaganda teaching, but there are other winds blowing that keep people, they're still keeping people to learn badly, to learn lies, to learn things that are negative toward them. So that tension, talk more about that ongoing tension, because you're at a place in these academic institutions where, to my mind, that tension is 24/7, 365.
Yeah. I mean, it's even people like colleagues of mine who say that they're, sympathetic to the work I do in the classroom or the things I write, but then their discipline only allows them to talk about those particular issues in a certain way. And then it almost seems as if they're bad rapping and policing what I do and say in my classrooms. So for instance, I teach a class called Race, Violence, and Incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are some other people who deal with prisons on campus. But, what students tell me, the way that these professors, my colleagues, think about the way I go about it, it makes me shake my head, because it's just policing at the end of the day.
Give us a layperson name in terms of policing, correcting, disagreeing with you behind your back.
It's a disagreement with a head shake, right? Like, I can't believe, you're reading that stuff. Can't believe you said that. We need to think about it this way.
Okay, let's spend a few minutes on that in terms of the formal debates, the internal debates, the confusion that's going on, the fake news, the real news, the Fox versus ABC versus Black Agenda Report, and then lastly, and also let's talk about from your campus, you can still see Lewisburg Penitentiary, I believe.
Oh yeah, it's a sobering reminder. One, at the reality of who's, housed there, particularly because, again, some of the work I do. But, the funny thing is, and I don't mean funny in the comical sense, is that a lot of actually people, when I ask my students about it, they don't realize that it's there.
So it's there, but they don't see it, you're saying.
Exactly.
So I guess for people that are listening, literally from the campus, when I graduated in 1971, you can actually see Lewisburg Penitentiary. And at that point, when I was there, Professor Saucier, Jimmy Hoffa was still alive. And I did some campus work in the prison there and thought about getting involved with prison stuff. I visited the campus. So, but you're right. So this gets to where something can be present in your view, but your identity prevents you from actually seeing it, you're saying.
Your identity, or you just maybe, you look from that view and it's absolutely beautiful if you take the prison out, right? So maybe you just get, consumed with the beauty of the mountains and the tree range.
Okay.
But I think it does give an idea of how people operate on campus, is that something in plain sight is not really understood or seen. There's kind of, I mentioned George Jackson earlier, there's kind of blood in a lot of people's eyes. They can't
Right.
see it, even though it's right there.
Right.
And I think this is, to kind of go back to the essay, this is why I kind of fear these things, because just because someone is teaching about race and racism doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting to the root of the problem. So you can feel, it's almost like going to dinner and eating food. You can feel satiated with what you did, but maybe it was just a bunch of empty calories.
So let's spend our next 8 or 9 minutes on that topic, because
Sure.
right around the George Floyd situation, I went to Rosemary Hall, and the headmaster there issued a statement, and Bucknell, your president, our president, issued a statement. Went to Yale Divinity School, and the Divinity School issued a statement, and Yale interviewed. So many presidents of these academic institutions issued statements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days afterwards. It was really incredible.
Sure.
But you're saying that was not necessarily authentic or misdirection.
No, I don't want to question the authenticity of them, because I don't know, these people well enough to know if they're saying what they really feel. But I think where I would be cautious is that we take that performance as being a kind of a positive action in the grand scheme of things, where I think in some ways we should actually see it as possibly a diversion. Or at the very least, if we don't want to see it as a diversion, we should not be satiated and comfortable with it. We should say, okay, let's take that momentum and let's build something else, right? Let's work towards something else. But I think a lot of people say, okay, they said that, I feel better now. My institution is not the racist institution I thought it was. So. And
you're saying words do not necessarily define the reality.
Well, not necessarily. I think other things could be done to show that you're really interested in, stopping what's going on.
Okay. Just to give us a little bit of a relaxing moment. Talk to you're teaching remotely currently?
Actually, no, I'm teaching in the classroom.
So is socially distanced in the classroom?
Yes.
And what's keeping you kind of optimistic? I mean, because you've devoted. I presume you want to remain in academia or in terms of the public discourse for a long time. What's keeping you motivated to fight this battle of truth versus falsehood?
I think really just I guess because I am hopeful to some extent that there is a possibility. I think there's a whole, we mentioned tools earlier, toolkit out there that we could all use.
Yes.
At least begin to use, that actually could give us greater momentum, moving forward. So we don't have to really think of a lot of new concepts and ideas because they're there. Okay, a lot of them have just simply been buried.
So let's lift up and let's shout out some of the northern lights that are there for us. Boys, and you mentioned Ida B. Wells, and
I'm a big fan, for instance, of the knowledge and theories of political prisoners, because I think, what do political prisoners have to lose nowadays, right?
It's 11:45.
So they're able to tell us, or they're at least able to think at the limits.
So Mumia, George
Mumia
Jackson,
Abu Jamal, George Jackson. We still really need to think about Assata, I believe. Jalil Mutakim, for instance. I mean, these are people that are, cornerstones in my classrooms and really in my writing. If it's not specifically that, they're at least, haunting me to kind of do that due diligence. Like for instance, I think, with the death of Chad Boseman and everything, I think, that passing is I mean, it's unfortunate, but I see students wanting to do stuff around that, but there are real Black Panthers still sitting in the penitentiary, and no one's saying let's do stuff for them.
What are you working on next?
I'm actually in between. I have these two books. One is a co-author book with a very good friend and co-author of mine, Tryon Woods, who writes a lot for Black Agenda Report. We're working on a book called Ex Aqua. It's about Black African migration in the Mediterranean. And I'm also working on a book called Black Frames. I'm a cyclist, and I'm interested in the connection between sports, Blackness, and cycling. And that's another book.
Well, what is, you lost me there. What does that mean? I know what a bicycle is. From time to time, I wake up black and whatever else you said, but so the connection is what again?
I'm just looking at the connections between cycling, which is considered to be a traditionally white sport,
right,
recreational activity, and Blackness. So, I'm interviewing pro cyclists who are Black, recreational cyclists who are Black, and trying to get their experiences on the two wheels.
Fascinating.
And I'm thinking about that.
So you're looking to win to get the yellow jersey then?
I guess in some ways.
Or you're going to call it a black jersey.
Yeah. It's funny because, like you mentioned, I've been doing this for a little bit, and this Black Frames book is going to be several books in, and I really wanted to do a book that kind of I could rest a little bit, or I felt I could, but the same issues are popping up in that book. So
and tease with us a little bit about the Black Frames again. What's the focus of that book?
Well, I'm playing on the idea of a bicycle frame, but how we frame our understanding of identity, racism, and things like that.
Yes, that's big on, yeah.
So, the book is going after things like representation and the limitations of representation and stuff like that. So
interesting.
Just developing new courses too.
And so you're a firm, correct me if I'm wrong, you're a firm believer that we can go from we can't at some point reach 20/20 vision, either if we have new glasses or if we have surgery, but you still believe that as a species, we can begin to, we can improve.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if Black Studies becomes the kind of, you mentioned Northern Star, I think if that becomes the critical lens by which we can look at the world, then all the better.
A shout out to some of the other programs that were the Africana Studies or Black Studies programs that you respect or admire, or some of your peers. You want to mention some of them?
I really respect what they've done historically at UMass Amherst. Mm-hmm. They've just always been at the forefront of doing these things.
Okay.
How
about the Hutchinson Center in Cambridge?
I think they do some they do some really great programming. I can't say much about their department and what they do because I don't know much about it anymore. But the Hutchinson Center definitely has the ability to really program at a very sophisticated level. I wish they would hear a little some different voices at times, but they tend to go one note.
Well, and I'm not picking on them, and they certainly received a lot of money. That's why they call it the Hutchinson Center.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate the sensitivity, perhaps, of you don't want to put people on blast in your profession. But when you say one note, people talk about the general dichotomy as conservative and liberal, but even within the most liberal of organizations, there's a conservative element and there's a liberal element. So when you say what would be some of the other notes that you'd like to see the Hutchinson Center play? I think they have the ability to kind of rubber stamp certain types of insights within Black Studies, and then those become the sole lenses from which students and other faculty use. And I don't see many scholars at Harvard thinking about, again, just because I mentioned them, political prisoners and Black politics at that level. It's normally through the domain of thinking Black politics and democracy, rather than say, I don't know, the limitations of democracy and Black politics, those types of things. Boy, Harry, our station manager at WNHH, will play the music, and that'll be our cue that we've been kicked off like the Harlem Apollo hour. So we have about maybe 2 or 3 more minutes. Any questions for me or anything that's been burning on your mind that we haven't talked about or shared? Or
no, I'm just really glad that you're doing this in Hartford. This is where I find the most. I just really want to commend you. This is where I think the best Black Studies takes place, and that is outside of the academy, right? So I want to
What's kept you there? Why haven't you escaped from your own self-imposed prison? So, I mean, I'll pay you. I'll give you a stipend for the next. I'll give you a MacArthur grant, and you can keep it for the next 10 years.
Well, I wish. I mean, yeah. I mean,
if you had the MacArthur, what would you be doing? If you get the MacArthur, what would you be doing?
I think I would spend a lot more time on the writing part and really, yeah, a lot more writing. You know.
So the power of writing, that's something that's embedded in you.
Yeah, I think so. As much as it's I don't find it easy, but I think to really kind of hone that skill to get the word out is the best way to really kind of change things.
And some of and I'm going to just kind of rapid fire here before Harry plays music. Some of the challenges because you're teaching, you're working with young people, 18, 19. Mm-hmm. I mean, some might even be 17. Might not turn 18 until later in the fall. Young folks. I mean, if I think about what I thought about and did during those years, I don't even want to tell you. Nor can I remember many of the classes that I took about now, but that's an aside. So, but some of the challenges, because you're talking about some heavy stuff, some life-changing information. Some of the challenges of that, questions you might get from students.
No, I mean, there's always challenges, but like I tell my students always on the first day, look, my main goal is to make sure that when you go home for Thanksgiving or whenever, that your parents don't know who you are anymore, and your boyfriend and girlfriend want to break up with you because you're asking too many questions about the world and you want to do something about it. So,
and why is not your charge to them that you're baptizing them, to use that expression, to have their parents or their girlfriend see things their way?
Well, not see things their way, but what it says to me is that they're beginning to make themselves unstable. They're beginning to question how they operate in the world. Okay. And then they're bringing that analytic to the dinner table or wherever. And that begins to frustrate people, right?
So as we conclude, and here I want you to speak directly to it or even disagree. Mm-hmm. If the folks that are feeling that there's comfortable, stable, the status quo is fine today, they're really ones that are holding us back.
Yeah. I mean, I think King was right. You know, we need to really cultivate maladjustment. If you feel you're adjusted, then that's an issue.
Interesting. I think we can conclude on that. And that's because I've been maladjusted for a long time, so maybe that's a good thing.
I think it is a good thing.
But before Harry plays the music, once you take that leap of faith to kind of explore new rhythms and rhymes, sometimes you can jump off the precipice not knowing. You know, there's the faith dimension, there's the risk dimension, and then whether society will catch you, mm-hmm. or let you just fall prey to drugs or even commit suicide. I'm being somewhat dramatic as we conclude, but mm-hmm. To engage in life-changing experiences sometimes not. It can incite fright. You can be frozen even sure. by that possibility. They may take your course and realize the need to do it, but the need might be so overwhelming they may be stuck in their tracks with how do I, the fear element kind of freezes them.
But that's where I think the whole idea of Black studies being predicated on community is important.
So what does that mean?
This isn't a solo venture. Yeah, you may read the book by yourself. You may be sitting in your classroom by yourself, but you're doing this in community with others. You're listening to radio stations like yours. You're going to other places to think about these things, explore them, and activate new ways of operating and being in the world. If it's just by yourself, then yeah, that could be dangerous. But so I think the community aspect needs to be really highlighted and fortified and strengthened and always talked about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, so, mm-hmm. Interesting. So the need for community, and also I hear you saying that the community can provide healing to it from time to time.
Absolutely. It provides that kind of respite from the dangers of the world. So yes.
Fascinating. Great. Khalil, thank you so much.
No, thanks a lot, Tom. I appreciate it. It's fun.
This is good. The only caveat is that I think I'm going to have to kind of lean on you once again, maybe in a few months or earlier.
No, maybe I can write something soon, and you can have me on.
Yeah, write some. You know how to prepare.
I did have one recently posted, so you can check that one out.
So tease us as we conclude. What's
Oh, it was another one on Black Agenda Report. It was about Naomi Osaka and tennis and genocide.
So what is? I mean, many people have seen that she wore her 7 hats, and fortunately, she was able to play 7 rounds. But so, what was the genocide aspect of it?
Well, she said she's sick and tired of her people suffering, at the hands of the police.
Yes.
And she mentioned the word genocide in her tweet.
Did she actually mention the word?
Yeah.
Cut it out. So. Fascinating. Thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
This is good.
I appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Hey, you too.
I'm buying a battery-powered bicycle. Does that count? No, I can stop it. No, I'm a senior citizen. Come on. A Tesla. I'm getting a Tesla bike.
Okay. Nice.
Talk to you soon, man. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Understand what black is. Power you must yield to. Of course, so strong, we try to sleep it away. They say you must be electric and plugged in to the sockets of the world. Black is humanity.